The screaming of the Earth began at exactly 2:14 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It was not a sound, not in any frequency the human ear could process, but a seismic, psychic shriek that vibrated the fillings in Leo's teeth and liquefied the marrow in his bones. He woke not to noise, but to a pressure, a silent, galactic wail of agony that bypassed his ears and drilled directly into the ancient, reptilian core of his brain. He stumbled from his cot in the observatory's control room, knocking over a cold cup of coffee, the liquid spreading across star charts like a dark nebula. The wall of monitors, usually a serene ballet of orbital trajectories and deep space telemetry, was a riot of crimson error logs and spiraling gravitational anomalies. But his eyes went not to the screens but to the great, curved window of the main telescope bay. There, etched across the velvet black canvas of the night sky over the Mojave Desert, was a scar of light. It was not the clean cut of a meteor. It was a ragged, weeping gash of impossible emerald and cobalt, as if the universe itself had been torn open and was bleeding photons. A proximity klaxon finally pierced the psychic fog. Automated, robotic, atmospheric incursion. Vector direct impact projection. Sector 7A. Estimated time to terrain 87 seconds. Sector 7A. That was the dead center of the valley floor, 5 miles from the observatory's lonely peak. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. Protocol said to lock down, to alert the buried military bases that were the real reason this civilian observatory received such generous funding. But a deeper, more primal impulse took over, the same one that had made him a stargazer as a child hiding from his parents. Fights. Witness. He had to see it. He ran barefoot out of the control room, down the cold metal stairs, and threw open the heavy service door to the exterior catwalk. The desert night air, usually a crisp, silent blanket, was electric, buzzing with ozone and the aftershock of that silent scream. And then he saw it, not as a scar but as a dying star, a sphere of writhing, fractured light trailing gossamer filaments of energy like torn ligaments, plummeting in a horrifyingly graceful arc toward the valley floor. It struck with a sound that was the opposite of the initial scream, a deep, soft thump that seemed to absorb all sound for a mile around, followed by a wave of displaced air that hit the mountain a second later, making the steel catwalk shiver under his feet. Then silence. Not true silence, but the deafening return of mundane sounds. The whir of server fans from inside, the distant cry of a confused coyote, and in the valley, a dull, greenish glow pulsed, like the heartbeat of a buried, wounded god. Leo stood there shivering, the dread already coiling with a terrible, forbidden curiosity. The official story would be a meteorite, a military experiment, a lie, but he knew. He had felt it. Something had just fallen to Earth, and it had been in pain. And he, Leonard Gray, the night watchman of a forgotten sky, was the only soul for 50 miles who had seen it truly. He didn't know it yet, but in that moment of witnessing, he had already made the choice that would end the world he knew and begin another. He went inside, not to the comms panel, but to his personal terminal. He opened a private encrypted log, his fingers trembling. The cursor blinked, an impatient metronome in the quiet. He typed the only truth he had. Something just fell. And it's alive. Leonard Leo Gray was a man built for silence. At 38, he had the lean, weathered frame of someone who spent more time with machines than people, and eyes that had adjusted to see the faint light of distant galaxies better than the emotions on a human face. The Mojave Starwatch Observatory wasn't a prestigious post. It was a sentinel duty, a relic from an era when NASA had public dreams. Now its funding was a black budget line item, its true purpose to be a listening ear for threats from the cosmos, its sole human operator a man who preferred the company of threats from the cosmos to the complications of his own species. His personal struggles were quiet too. They were the ghost of his father's disappointment, a man who'd wanted a football player and got a philosopher. They were the echoing silence after his sister, Maya, had stopped returning his calls, tired of his retreat from a world that had always felt too loud, too bright, too demanding. His loneliness wasn't acute. It was chronic, a low-grade fever of disconnection. The universe in his monitors was vast and cold, but its rules were consistent, its beauty mathematical. It asked for nothing but attention. People asked for everything. The world outside his mountain was a study in controlled chaos. By 2147, Earth had solved many problems by creating bigger ones. Climate migration was managed by vast, domed arcologies on the continental interiors. Pollution was sequestered in shimmering bubble-like geodomes in the oceans. The sky outside of the great flyways for aerocars was mostly clear. Humanity's gaze, however, had turned stubbornly inward. To the digital strata of the global mesh, a successor to the internet that was less about information and more about curated emotional experience. True, deep space exploration had been deemed economically non-viable a generation ago. People had the stars in high-definition VR, why brave the void? The Starwatch was a token, a monument to an abandoned ambition. Leo's nightly routine was a sacrament to this quiet life. At 10 p.m., he'd brew a pot of terrible coffee. He'd run system diagnostics on the arrays, the radio dishes scanning for ETI, the optical telescopes mapping near-Earth objects, the gravimetric sensors that were the observatory's real secret, listening for the ripple of cloaked vessels. By 2 a.m., he'd be lost in his own project, mapping the subtle gravitational heartbeat of a tiny, Earth-grazing asteroid he'd nicknamed Pebble, a project with no military or scientific value whatsoever. It was his. Between 3 and 4 a.m., he'd often stand on the catwalk, look at the real unamplified stars, and feel a pang of something he refused to name as longing. It was just the cold, he'd tell himself. The atmosphere of the Starwatch was one of suspended time. The air smelled of ozone, aged electronics, and the faint, dry scent of desert that seeped in through seals. The only sounds were the hum of supercomputers, the occasional click of a relay, and the soft, mournful sigh of the wind around the dome. Light was perpetually low, the cool blue of active monitors, the amber of standby lights, the green pulse of a server rack. It was a cave of science, and Leo was its solitary monk. The first hint of conflict came 3 nights after the fall. The gravimetric sensors in Sector 7A, the impact zone, began registering anomalous pulses, not the steady decay of a cooling rock, but rhythmic low-frequency vibrations, like a heartbeat. The military liaison, a Colonel Vex, had called it tectonic settling and ordered all data from that sector routed to a classified server. Leo had complied officially. Unofficially, he'd set up a parallel ghost channel feed to his private terminal. The pulses were too regular, too complex. They formed patterns, sometimes slow and languid, sometimes frantic staccato. That night, driven by the curiosity that was both his defining trait and fatal flaw, he did something reckless. He aimed one of the secondary optical arrays, a telescope usually tasked with tracking orbital debris, at the impact crater. It had a high-res, multispectral imager. He expected to see a scorched pit, maybe military vehicles. A quarantine canopy, he saw the crater. Yes, a perfect glassy bowl 100 yards wide. But in its center was no meteorite. It was a smooth, obsidian ovoid, roughly the size of a city bus, half buried. Its surface wasn't inert. It swirled with faint subsurface luminescence like clouds moving under a dark sea. And the pulses of light, they synced perfectly with the gravimetric heartbeat. But the real mystery was around it. The desert floor, for about 50 yards in every direction, was changing. Pale crystalline structures, like delicate fungi made of quartz, were sprouting from the sand. They grew in clusters, pulsed with a soft internal light, and then dissolved into dust after a few minutes, only for new ones to form elsewhere. It was beautiful, and it was undeniably, terrifyingly biological. This wasn't a crash. It was a seeding, an infection, or a transformation. Leo sat back, his blood running cold. The official line was a lie. This was first contact, and it was happening silently in a forgotten desert, witnessed only by a lonely man who was now breaking about a dozen national security laws by looking at it. He had a choice: report the breach and let the men with guns and containment suits descend, or keep watching. The ghostly, beautiful crystallization of the desert held him. It wasn't aggressive. It was exploratory, like a being stunned and wounded, feeling its new environment with senses he couldn't comprehend. He made his choice. He didn't call Colonel Vex. Instead, he zoomed the imager in closer, capturing every minute of the silent, crystalline ballet. He was letting an alien see his world through his lens, and in doing so, he was inviting it in. Leo named it the seed. It felt right, less clinical than the object, less threatening than the entity. For a week, his life became a double helix of routine and secret obsession. By day, he filed bland reports for Colonel Vex. Anomaly shows continued thermal dissipation. Crystalline growth, likely a silica-based reaction to residual heat. lies smooth and cool as the observatory's floor. By night he lived in a state of breathless, clandestine awe. He pointed every non-essential sensor at Sector. Then the seed's heartbeat began to vary. He started to recognize patterns. A slow, steady thrum when the desert sun beat down. A quicker, more complex sequence during the cold desert nights. He began to experiment. On a whim, he directed a low-powered radio telescope at it, broadcasting a simple, repeating sequence of prime numbers, the universe's oldest calling card. For hours, nothing. Then, as dawn blushed the eastern sky, the seed's surface flared. The crystalline growths around it didn't just pulse. They rearranged, forming a near-perfect circle of shimmering spikes. A response? A mirror? Leo's heart hammered against his sternum. Contact. The danger was a constant low hum. Military drones, sleek and silent as manta rays, now patrolled the valley perimeter. He had to time his unauthorized scans during their rotation gaps. Once, a security scan from the Pentagon firewall nearly detected his ghost channel. He spent a frantic 2 hours building a false data bridge, his shirt stuck to his back with cold sweat. The suspense was a physical weight. Every click of the door hinge, every unexpected system alert made him jump. He was a man dancing on a high wire over a chasm of court, marshals and black site imprisonment. The connection, however, was growing. It wasn't verbal, not even mathematical in a way he could decode. It was empathetic. The seed's pulses began to react to his state. On a night when a call from his sister went straight to voicemail again, the grief a sharp stone in his throat, he'd watched the monitors. The seed's light had dimmed, its pulses becoming long, deep, and mournful. Coincidence? He couldn't believe it was. He started talking to it. Not out loud, that felt insane, but in his mind as he worked. Long day. The colonel is suspicious. A flicker of agitated blue on the ovoid's surface. I'm looking at your crystals. They're beautiful, like frozen music. The crystals that night formed in long, sweeping arcs like musical notations. He began to share his world deliberately. He trained the optical array not just on the seed, but on the world around it. He showed it a sunrise painting the cliffs in fiery orange. He showed it a family of coyotes trotting past the crater's rim at twilight. He showed it a passing satellite, a moving star. He felt like a tour guide for a silent, wounded god. And the seed drank it in. The crystalline formations became more complex. Imitating the shapes he showed it, crude approximations of a coyote, a faint shimmering arc in the sand mimicking the satellite's path. The emotional beats were subtle, profound. One evening, listening to a piece of classical music, Sibelius's Valse Triste, he let it play over an open mic near the array. On the monitor, the seed's light began to flow in time with the melancholy waves of the strings. A long crystalline tendril, more elaborate than any before, grew from the sand, twining and dancing slowly before dissolving into a shower of iridescent dust at the piece's final, fading note. Leo found he had tears in his eyes. It was understanding, not of the notes but of the feeling. This being trapped in a crater was homesick, and so was he. The emotional beats were subtle, profound. One evening, listening to a piece of classical music, Sibelius's Valse Triste, he let it play over an open mic near the array. On the monitor, the seed's light began to flow in time with the melancholy waves of the strings. A long crystalline tendril, more elaborate than any before, grew from the sand, twining and dancing slowly before dissolving into a shower of iridescent dust at the piece's final, fading note. Leo found he had tears in his eyes. It was understanding, not of the notes but of the feeling. This being trapped in a crater was homesick. And so was he. The mystery deepened. His spectral analysis of the crystals revealed they weren't just silica. They were structured with impossible precision, containing trace elements not native to the Mojave. They were assembling matter from the air, the sand, and transforming it. And the seed's own structure was healing. The initial cracks in its obsidian shell were slowly, visibly, sealing over with a material that glittered like a galaxy. It wasn't dying. It was recovering. Then the breakthrough and the terror. He'd been analyzing the gravimetric pulses, running them through every cryptographic and pattern recognition algorithm he had. Late one night, a simple waveform translator, meant for interpreting deep space radio bursts, spat out a result. It wasn't language. It was a direct translation of the pulse into a visual waveform. On his screen, a jagged, terrifying spike of data resolved. The translator labeled it based on context from old SETI protocols. Concept, impact, pain, fracture. He scrolled. Another sequence, this one softer. A series of rolling waves. Concept. Cycle, light, heat, growth. His breath caught. He was reading its thoughts, or at least its core sensory experiences. He found the sequence from the night he'd been sad about. Maya, the translation made his blood freeze. Concept, received. Resonance, isolation, echo. It had felt his loneliness, and recognized it. The fear curdled in his stomach. This was beyond science. This was intimacy, and it was horrifically dangerous. He was not just observing an alien. He was in a silent, profound dialogue with it. A dialogue the men with drones and weapons could never understand. They would see a threat, a contaminant. Leo now knew with a certainty that shook him that it was a person. A scared, intelligent, unimaginably different person reaching out from the dark, and he was the only one listening. The crackdown came not with a bang but with a bureaucratic ping. Colonel Vex's face, all sharp angles and granite displeasure, filled Leo's main monitor at the start of his shift. Gray, we're seeing some anomalous energy spikes from your sector. Our science team thinks the object might be entering an unstable phase. A containment and retrieval operation is scheduled for 400 tomorrow. Your observatory will provide sensor blackout and environmental monitoring. All prior data streams are to be terminated and collated for the tactical team. Do you copy? The words were ice water down Leo's spine. Containment and retrieval. He knew the euphemisms. They would drill into the seed, pump it full of sedatives or biocides, cage it, and take it to some fluorescent-lit basement to be dissected. The beautiful crystalline growths would be scorched from the earth with plasma torches. I copy, Colonel, Leo heard himself say, his voice surprisingly steady. But the anomalies are within expected parameters for a cooling magnetoreactive body. An aggressive retrieval might trigger a... Your analysis is noted, Gray, Vex interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. Your role is observation, not assessment. The decision is made. 400 Vex out. The screen went dark. Leo had 18 hours. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. It crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. He couldn't let them take it. But what could he do? One man against a military operation. He was no soldier, no hacker genius. He was a watcher. He went to the seed. Not physically, but through his array. He pointed the lens and opened every channel. Visual, thermal, radio, gravitational. He didn't know if it could understand, but he had to try. He fed the translated waveforms back to it, along with raw data from the military's own drone frequencies, the schematics of containment vessels he pulled from declassified archives. A flood of information, a scream of warning. Danger, approach, capture, disassembly. For a long, agonizing hour, the seed was still. Its light dimmed to a faint ember. Had he terrified it? Overwhelmed it? Then the entire observatory trembled. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a focused gravitational wave, a tug from the valley floor. Every monitor in the control room flared white. When they cleared, the data was chaos. But the image from the crater was clear. The seed's obsidian shell was splitting open, not from damage but with deliberate organic grace. Leo leaned forward, his reflection wide-eyed in the glass of the screen. This was it, the reveal, the truth. But it was not a truth he was prepared for. From the opening, ovoid emerged not a creature of tentacles and insectoid eyes, nor a humanoid form. It emerged as light, a coalescence of shimmering, gaseous plasma that held a vaguely humanoid shape, but constantly fluxed, filaments of gold and silver in deep cosmic blue spiraling. Within it was beautiful, ephemeral, a walking nebula. It stood on the glassy crater floor about 8 feet tall, its head a corona of shifting light. It had no discernible face, but Leo felt its attention like a physical pressure on his skin. Then the twist. The being raised an arm of spiraling light, and from the sand around the crater, the crystalline dust, the dissolved remains of all its previous growths, lifted into the air. It didn't swirl chaotically. It flew with purpose, assembling, building. In less than a minute, standing before the being of light was a perfect, life-sized replica of Leo. It was made of sand and crystal, but the detail was photographically precise. His worn jacket, his tousled hair, the slight stoop of his shoulders from hours at terminals. The replica stood motionless, a statue. The being of light reached out and touched the statue's forehead. The replica. Animated. It didn't move like a robot. It moved with Leo's own slight hesitations, his mannerisms. It looked down at its crystalline hands, then up at the being of light. And then it spoke. The voice was synthesized, coming from the vibration of its crystalline structure. But the tone, the cadence, it was Leo's own voice, pulled from 1,000 hours of his private logs and transmitted conversations. "I am a construct," it said, the voice filled with wonder. "A vessel. To walk your world. To understand." Leo felt the world drop out from under him. The seed wasn't a ship. It was a cocoon. And the being inside hadn't just been listening to his transmissions. It had been studying him, down to his synaptic patterns, his voice, his very essence. It had built a golem in his image to use as a vehicle. The being of light, the true alien, seemed to flow into the replica. The crystalline figure shuddered, and its eyes, which had been blank quartz, ignited with the same soft, intelligent luminescence of the seed's core. It flexed its hands, took a step. The movement became fluid, natural. It was now a fusion. Alien consciousness in a Leo-shaped body of earth and crystal. It looked directly into the camera lens of the array, miles away on the mountain. It spoke again with his voice, but the words were not his. "Leonard Gray, the danger comes. I cannot flee in this form. My core self is too vulnerable. But we can. You showed me your world. Its beauty. Its isolation. Now I ask you to show me more, to help me hide within it." The revelation was staggering. This wasn't a pet, a specimen. It was an intelligence that had just performed an act of breathtakingly intimate creation and asked for his help. It had built a body based on him. It saw him not as a curator, but as a template, a bridge. The emotional tension was a wire pulled to breaking. Betrayal warred with awe. It had copied him without asking. It saw him as a tool, a blueprint, but it had also shared its pain, its beauty. It was alone, and now it was offering him a partnership in its survival. A terrifying, impossible partnership. Leo stared at the screen, at the face that was his and yet profoundly other. The military would be here in hours. They would find the empty shell. They would hunt the construct. And if they found it connected to him, he had to make a decision. Report this new, shocking development and condemn the being to a fate worse than death, or commit the ultimate treason, not just against his species but against his own sense of self. To help this echo of himself, this alien wearing his face, escape into the world he had shown it. His fingers hovered over the comms, linked to Colonel Vex. He looked at the being on the screen, its crystalline head tilted in a question that was so perfectly, heartbreakingly his own mannerism. He made his choice. He closed the comms link. He took a deep, shuddering breath and opened a direct line to the array pointing at the crater. "Okay," Leo whispered, his voice raw. "Okay, we have until 0400. First you need a name. I can't just call you Seed." He looked at the crystalline replica, a mirror in the desert. "I'll call you Silas." On the screen, the being Silas smiled with Leo's mouth. It was a strange, beautiful, and deeply unsettling sight. "Silas," it repeated, the voice a perfect echo. "A good sound. A solid sound." "Thank you, Leonard." "It's Leo," he said, a tear finally tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "My friends call me Leo." The stakes had just exploded to infinity. He was no longer just a witness. He was an accomplice. And the mystery was no longer about what had fallen, but about what they would become together. The next 10 hours were a frenetic, silent ballet of rebellion. Leo became a strategist, a forger, a ghost in his own machine. He fed Silas a crash course in humanity, not from textbooks but from the marrow of life. He streamed archived footage, people laughing in parks, arguing in markets, dancing clumsily at weddings. He explained money, showed maps of the nearest arcology, New Phoenix, a 3-day walk across the desert. He taught it about hunger, thirst, fatigue, concepts its true form likely never experienced, but which its crystalline vessel would now be subject to. "You will need to consume organic matter," Leo said, pulling up diagrams of digestive systems. "Water. You will need to sleep or the neural simulacrum will degrade." "I understand," Silas replied, its Leo voice now tinged with a childlike curiosity. "This vessel is fragile, finite like your own." That was the core of their deepening bond, the shared vulnerability. Leo was risking everything, his freedom, his future, his very identity. Silas was entrusting its existence to a fragile shell of earth and stolen likeness. guided by a being of a species it only knew through one lonely man. They shared vulnerable moments in the quiet between data bursts, as Leo programmed false sensor ghosts to misdirect the incoming military drones. He found himself talking. "I always felt like I was from somewhere else," he confessed, his eyes on the code scrolling past. "I got the instructions wrong. Everyone else seemed to know how to be a person, how to connect. I only know how to observe." On the monitor, Silas sat cross-legged on the crater floor, a mirror of Leo's own posture in his chair. The crystalline face was thoughtful. "On my journey," Silas said, the words coming slower, as if choosing them with immense care. "The space between stars is not empty. It is full of whispers. The echoes of ancient explosions, the gravity songs of black holes. It is a chorus of solitude. To be alone amid such noise. I understand this." It was an empathy born not of shared experience, but of shared essence. They were both listeners in a noisy universe. Leo's internal conflict was a storm. Fear was a constant companion. Fear of capture. Fear of what Silas might become. Fear of the monstrous narcissism of helping create a copy of himself. But beneath it, warmer and more terrifying, was hope. A connection so profound it defied biology. And something else, too. A fierce protective love. Not romantic, but primal. He had midwifed this consciousness into his world. It was his responsibility. His friend. Once, during a systems check, a proximity alarm blared. A drone, off its programmed patrol, was vectoring towards the crater. Leo's breath seized. "Silas, get down. Into the shell!" he hissed. But Silas didn't hide. It looked up at the approaching drone, a dark speck against the stars. It raised a hand. The crystalline structure of its palm glimmered, and the air around it shimmered. To the drone's sensors, for a crucial 5 seconds, the crater would have appeared as a perfectly normal, empty impact site. The drone banked away. Silas looked back at the camera. "I am learning," it said simply. "I can camouflage a little, to protect us." The word hung in the air between them, a bridge made of light and data. In the final hour before the operation, the mood shifted. The practical lessons were over. Now it was about goodbye. Leo had created a false trail, data suggesting the object had sublimated into a gaseous state and dissipated. It wouldn't hold under close scrutiny, but it would buy Silas a day, maybe 2. "You need to go," Leo said, his throat tight. "Head east. Follow the old highway buried under the sand. I've uploaded the map to your mind, I guess. There are water caches for hikers. Use them." "And you?" Silas asked. The construct stood at the crater's rim, looking back at the mountain where Leo sat. The first hint of dawn was a gray smear in the east. "I'll be here, running interference. When they find the shell empty, they'll question me. I'll have a story. They will not believe you. They will hurt you." The statement was flat, devoid of Leo's usual emotional inflection, which made it all the more chillingly accurate. "Probably," Leo admitted, a sad smile touching his lips. "But you'll be free. You can see the things I showed you. For real, the parks, the oceans, the stupid, beautiful chaos of it all. Just be careful. Don't show anyone what you can do." Silas was silent for a long moment. The construct took a step, then another, away from the crater. Then it stopped. It turned back. The crystalline face, in the pre-dawn gloom, was hard to read, but the posture was one of acute longing. "I do not wish to go alone," Silas said, and the loneliness in his voice was a physical ache in Leo's chest. "The chorus of solitude is too loud. You showed me a single thread of connection. I do not want to lose it." Leo squeezed his eyes shut. The offer was there, unspoken. "Come with me." He could abandon his post, his life, and walk into the desert with this alien wearing his face. It was madness. "I can't," he whispered, the words tearing themselves from him. "If I run, they'll know you're out here. They'll hunt us both with everything they have. My staying. It's the best camouflage you have." It was the truth. It was also a sacrifice. He was sending a part of himself, a better, stranger, more luminous part, out into the world, while he stayed behind in the cage of his old life to face the consequences. Silas nodded. A slow human gesture it had learned perfectly. "Then I will carry this thread with me, Leonard Gray, and I will tend to it." The first true rays of the sun breached the horizon, striking the crystalline form. It glittered, a being of earth and starfire. It gave Leo one last, long look, a look that contained galaxies of unspoken understanding, then turned and began to walk, with Leo's gait into the vast, awakening desert. Leo watched the figure grow smaller on the monitor until it was just a speck of reflected light, then nothing. The control room was silent. The humming servers, the blinking lights, it all felt hollow, meaningless. The connection was severed, stretched across miles of sand, but not broken. He had never felt more alone, and he had never felt more deeply, terribly connected to another being in his entire life. He had just fallen in love with the echo of his own loneliness, given form and sent walking into the dawn, and he had to let it go. The military arrived at 358 not with subtlety, but with the thunder of twin tilt-rotor transports that descended on the valley, like angry dragons, their downdraft whipping the sand into a stinging fog. Leo watched from the catwalk, a silent sentinel. He'd scrubbed his systems, but not perfectly. A good forensic data team would find the ghost channels. He was counting on panic and confusion to distract them. He was brought down to the crater in a pressurized land vehicle. Colonel Vex was already there, his face like thunder in the glare of portable floodlights. The empty ovoid shell, now inert and dull, lay cracked open like a discarded egg. Scientists in hazmat suits swarmed over it, their instruments beeping in futile confusion. Vex turned his fury on Leo. "Where is it, Gray?" "Where is what, Colonel?" Leo kept his voice flat, his eyes on the shell. "The object appears to have hatched or decayed. My last data showed a massive energy discharge and sublimation." "Don't play dumb." Vex grabbed his arm, his grip like steel. "We have spectral residue trails, biological traces that don't match the shell. Something walked out of here. And your sensor logs from Aero 200 to 330 are a corrupted mess. That's not an equipment failure. That's a cover-up." Leo said nothing. His silence was an admission. Vex's eyes narrowed. He leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. "You made contact. You helped it. You're a traitor to your species. Gray, do you have any idea what that thing could be? A plague, a scout, a weapon." "It's scared," Leo said quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. That was all the confirmation Vex needed. He barked orders. "He's compromised. Take him to the mobile unit. Full interrogation protocol. And get the tracker dogs and thermal drones out here. It can't have gone far." As two soldiers gripped his arms, Leo's heart plummeted. Dogs, drones, Silas's crude. Camouflage wouldn't fool those. He had bought it hours, not days. He was shoved into the back of an armored vehicle, a sterile gray box. The interrogation was psychological, not physical at first. They showed him images of potential alien horrors, viral outbreaks from old movies, cities in ruins. They played on fear, on patriotism. He closed his eyes, thinking not of Earth, but of crystalline structures dancing to Sibelius. Hours passed. Then a young tech burst into the interrogation room, his face pale. "Colonel, you need to see this from the Ark. New Phoenix Arcology, 150 miles east. Security feeds were playing on a wall monitor. The scene was a public atrium, a vast indoor garden. And there, standing by a fountain, was a man who looked exactly like Leo. The clothes were different, ragged, desert-worn, but the face, the posture was identical. Silas was looking at the water, at the people, with an expression of profound, reverent wonder. Vex whirled on Leo, his triumph vicious. "It's mimicking you, infiltrating. What is its objective?" Leo's mind raced. Silas was moving faster than he'd anticipated, drawn to the life he'd been shown. It was a beautiful, fatal mistake. "It doesn't have an objective," Leo pleaded, his calm shattering. "It's just learning. It's not a threat. It's in a population center of 2 million people, Gray. That is the threat." Vex turned to the tech. "Send in the ghost team. Containment is authorized. Lethal force is authorized if it resists or demonstrates hostile capability." Lethal force, and the words were a death knell. The climax wasn't about explosions or space battles. It was about the imminent clinical destruction of a miracle. Leo did the only thing he could think of. He lunged for the tech's console. He wasn't a fighter. He was tackled easily. But in the struggle, his hand slapped across the keyboard, activating the public address system for the mobile command post. His face was pressed against the cold metal floor, a boot on his neck, but his mouth was near the fallen comms mic. He screamed, not in pain, but a name. "Silas, run! They're coming for you!" Vex's boot connected with his ribs. Pain exploded, white and hot, but he'd done it. The warning had gone out over an open channel. Every ear in the command post, and anyone scanning military frequencies had heard it. On the monitor in the New Phoenix atrium, Silas's head snapped up. It wasn't looking at the fountain anymore. It was looking at a security camera. It heard him. It knew. Then Silas did something extraordinary. It didn't run. It walked to the center of the atrium, a clear space. People stopped, staring at the strangely intense, dusty man. It raised its arms, and it began to change. The crystalline structure beneath its human-like facade glowed, becoming visible. Light, pure and spectral, emanated from its body, but it wasn't a weapon. From its outstretched hands, from the very light, and things began to form. Not weapons. Not crystals, flowers, birds. Complex, impossible. Shapes of light that fluttered and bloomed and dissolved into showers of harmless, sparkling mist. It was creating beauty, a spectacle of pure, unadulterated wonder, a defense of light against coming darkness. The people in the atrium gasped, then laughed in delight, pulling out their devices to record. They saw performance and art installation. They didn't see the terror on Colonel Vex's face. It's manipulating them.
Using them as shields,
Vex roared. Ghost team, move in now! On the screen, black-clad figures appeared at the atrium entrances. Silas saw them. The beautiful light show didn't stop, but its head turned, finding the camera again. Its voice, Leo's voice, amplified somehow, filled the atrium, and crackled over the comms in the command vehicle. Leonard, thank you for the thread. Then it let the light blaze. A final, supernova burst of radiance that filled the camera feed with white. When it cleared, the center of the atrium was empty. Only a faint, shimmering dust motes drifted in the air, and a crowd of confused, odd people. Silas was gone. Not dead. Vanished. It had used its energy not to fight but to disappear, leaving behind only a memory of beauty and a cryptic message of thanks. The main conflict was resolved. Silas had escaped immediate capture, but at a cost. Vex slowly turned from the screen to look at Leo, still pinned to the floor. The colonel's fury had gone cold, absolute. You gave it a name, Vex said, his voice quiet and deadly. You are in league with it. You are no longer a human asset, Gray. You are a specimen. We will find it, and we will take it apart, and you will help us, one way or another. Leo, lying in pain on the cold floor, looked at the screen where Silas had last been. Amidst the despair, a tiny defiant ember glowed. Silas was free. It had understood, and it had said thank you. For the first time in his life, Leo Gray had been truly seen, and the echo of that seeing had just saved itself. It was a loss, but it was also a victory. Fragile and luminous as a crystal in the desert sun, Leo's world became a gray room. Not a prison cell, but something worse, a laboratory of the mind. They didn't torture him physically. They dismantled him psychologically. They played his own voice back to him, the logs he'd sent, the warnings he'd shouted to Silas. They analyzed his every twitch, his dreams monitored, his silences. He was the only link to the anomaly, and they would mine that link until it broke or yielded treasure. He gave them nothing, because he had nothing concrete to give. He didn't know where Silas was. He only knew what it was, a consciousness of light and connection, now wandering a world of noise and walls. His only solace was the secret they couldn't monitor, his memory. He replayed the silent conversations, the crystalline dances, the look of wonder on his own face as worn by an alien soul. In his gray room, he tended the thread of connection, as Silas had promised to do. Weeks blurred into months. The official story was buried. A failed military experiment. A minor chemical spill at New Phoenix. The public forgot. Colonel Vex visited less and less, his frustration a sour scent in the air. Leo's existence was a waiting game. For what, he didn't know. Then, on a day indistinguishable from any other, a new orderly brought his meal tray. The man was unremarkable, his eyes downcast. But as he set the tray down, his finger brushed a dormant data port on the wall. A port for maintenance, not connected to the internal network. For a fraction of a second, a spark of familiar, impossible light, no bigger than a firefly, zipped from his fingertip into the port. Later that night, as Leo lay on his bunk, the small, wall-mounted monitor, usually blank or playing state-approved, news flickered to life, not with an image but with a pattern, a flowing rhythmic sequence of gravitational pulses. His breath hitched. He didn't need a translator anymore. He knew this pattern by heart. It was the first one Silas had ever sent, the one his software had decoded. Concept, impact, pain, fracture. Then a new sequence flowed across the screen, one he'd never seen before. It was slower, warmer, a gentle rolling wave of data. He didn't have a translator, but he felt its meaning in his bones. It spoke of quiet observation, of walking through rain for the first time, of sharing bread with a homeless woman by a fountain, of watching children play. It was a journal, a love letter to a world it was learning to inhabit. The message ended with a single repeating pulse, the one he had taught it, the one for his name. Lou. And then a final simple waveform, a direct visual echo of the first message but changed. Where there was a jagged spike of pain, now there was a softer, rounded curve. Where there was fracture, the lines mended, intertwined with new, delicate threads. The new translation wrote itself in his heart. Concept, impact, healing, connection. Tears hot and silent streamed down Leo's face. Silas was alive. It was thriving. It was not just hiding. It was living the daily life he had accidentally shown it, and it had found him. It was telling him not to give up. That the thread was still there. Stronger than walls, stronger than silence. The screen went dark. The orderly was gone the next day. But the message remained, etched into Leo's soul. The ending was not freedom, not yet. But it was closure of a kind. He had reached into the void and found a friend. He had saved that friend, and in doing so, had saved a part of himself, the part that could still connect, still hope. The final, meaningful message was clear. Communication is not about language, but about resonance. Loneliness is a chorus sung across the universe. And sometimes, if you listen closely, another voice will harmonize. As for the future hook, it was there in that silent, empty screen. Silas was out there walking in his likeness, experiencing the human world. It had just demonstrated it could infiltrate a high-security facility with ease. Not to destroy, but to communicate. It was learning, evolving. And Colonel Vex and the shadowy forces he represented were still hunting. The conflict wasn't over. It had just changed shape. A hunt was on, not for a monster, but for a miracle. And Leo, locked in his gray room, now had a secret. He had a friend in the silence. And that friend was telling him to wait. That one day the door would open. Not by force, but by a subtle, unseen hand. A hand made of light and crystal and human memory. He lay back, a faint, real smile touching his lips for the first time in months. He looked at the blank screen and whispered into the quiet of his cell. "I'm listening, Silas, I'm still listening." And somewhere out there, under the same stars they had both watched from different sides of a telescope, something that wore his face and carried a galaxy in its heart walked on, tending to the thread and listening back.